Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Foundation's case study. My name is Jason DePonte. I run a company in London that produces digital media called The Swarm. And I am working with MIP to run some of the sessions and do some interviewing today. And I'm very happy to welcome Orlando Bagwell from the Ford Foundation, who's the director of the JustFilms program. And we're going to be talking about what it's like to work with the foundation, being involved with your project, and get some more details about what JustFilms is all about. But before we do that, I should say, in addition to being the director of the JustFilms initiative, Orlando also has a 25-year career as a filmmaker in the independent sector. So he's worked on both the production side of this and on the funding side of this. But before we kick off, we're going to see a short video that gives you a taste of some of their projects.
Okay.
Downsizing of Detroit, you're watching it live. These are houses that are never coming back.
Repent for the forgiveness of your sin.
They keep saying, are you rich, are you poor, are you rich, are you poor?
It's about the sanctity of human liberty and the cost of it if you want to take it.
I know it. Keep your head up, don't look down.
We just can't disappear. We just can't.
हम चाहते हैं कि हमारे साथ कोर्ट चले, उनको हम बंद करवाते हैं.
If he's found guilty, it will break him.
To stand up, to fight back, is just incredible.
Okay. Wow, applause. Less than 4 minutes into the session. That's quite something, and you guys are doing quite a lot of work. Can you tell me, just in case people don't know, tell me a little bit about the Ford Foundation and JustFilms and where that came from?
Okay. Well, it's great to be here and to talk about this work. I came to the Ford Foundation about maybe 9 years ago, and I came there because I had been a filmmaker before, and I'd been working with a lot of work that was tied to public television. And in the 1990s, foundations really kind of found their voice in documentaries, supporting work in public television. But when I got to the foundation, it was very clear that the industry itself was really changing. There were still avenues like public television where documentaries and that kind of programming was being broadcast and made available to the public. But you also saw a growing documentary community that was really thinking about how their films found new audiences. And at the same time, you found places like Sundance and festivals who were really kind of programming documentaries as a part of their work as well. And when I came to the foundation, really my work was tied to public television. And I was leading a special initiative around that work. But I also had the ability to kind of push a little bit of money aside and to support documentaries. And to tell you how JustFilms started, I invested in a project on South Africa called Have You Heard of Johannesburg? And it was a multi-part series on the international anti-apartheid movement. And my new president, Luis Libinas, had come to a screening of that event. And one of the things we always did is we worked with filmmakers around their films and supported their films and helped them to think through their film process and the product. But while we were doing that, we're also building communities around the work. Because we're a foundation. One of the reasons why we're involved in it is because we believe in storytelling and the power of that storytelling. But we also are thinking that in some way it's going to affect people. And we want to bring people together who have a stake in the issue. And in that case, we had people in the room who are, pioneers of the movement itself. We had people who are active in sports, people who are active in human rights, all these different spaces. And we were having a screening and all these people were in the room. And my president recognized that here was this real diverse group of people around this one project. And in some way, we wanted to think about how that could be an active part of what we did within the foundation. So we decided we would try to explore this idea of supporting documentaries, creating a real fund that was really targeted at the support of nonfiction work. And we've kind of moved into the fiction work as well, so I'll talk a little bit about that later. But the idea was that we could use this work as a really an opening into larger audiences around the work that we do as a social justice foundation. We work in human rights, we work in freedom of expression, we work in economic development, in sexuality and reproductive rights, in HIV work, but we felt that in some way we could bring these communities together, but we could do it with storytelling. And so a lot of what we do is to look for independent filmmakers who have great ideas, support their work, find other funders to come in and work with us. We don't fund films in totality, but we try and bring other partners to that work, but also to work with them around how, in fact, we can build communities around the work who are then going to be part of what this film could potentially do once it reaches audience and it moves them. We all know that when you walk into a theater and you watch a film, something happens in that room. The question is, what do you do with it? And that's what we've been exploring through JustFilms.
Okay, great. And so, as the sort of master storyteller who works with all of these projects, how do you make sure that that fits with the initiatives that the Ford Foundation has? How does that kind of relationship go?
There are two parts to that, because in one way we realize that everything can't speak to our foundation. That in some ways we're really looking to support a community of filmmakers and their work. So we've kind of split it up into three parts. One part we re-grant. We give grants to the Sundance Documentary Fund. We make grants to ITVS for their international work so they can bring international filmmakers to the community of filmmakers in the US and our filmmakers to other parts of the world. We support a transmedia fund at the Tribeca Film Festival, the Tribeca Institute. And we support other kinds of support groups underneath that. So in some ways, some part of our money goes to re-granting. Then we have work, a portion of the work that really is tied to the foundation and looking at the initiatives within the foundation and how I can bring other program officers into the idea that storytelling can be useful to their work. And the interesting thing about that is that oftentimes our money, we invest, we have a fund of $10 million. $10 million a year over the next 5 years. That $10 million kind of turns into like maybe $30 million once I'm bringing other partners in to support the work with us. And then we have a third branch, a third part of it, which is a smaller part of the overall budget. But what we realize is some of the programs that we want to fund have nothing to do with the foundation, have nothing to do with really the work that we might be doing in our overseas offices. But at the same time, it's really good storytelling. And in some way, we know that it should be out there, and we want to support those filmmakers, and we do that. We also have certain long-form series that we support that are part of larger campaigns that we think are really important to the work that we do, and we support some of that. So there's different tranches for how we distribute the money.
Okay, great. Shall we have a look at the second clip, which shows the program officers and the project?
Yeah, I should tell you what this is. Because I do work with program officers, we have a clip here that talks about our films that went to Sundance this year, but also it engages some of the program directors who talk about what those films mean for them and the work that they're doing.
Okay, great. If we could have the second clip.
One of the things we do at JustFilms is look for important storytelling that in some way kind of connects with some of the issues that we're involved in at the foundation. But we're really interested in good storytelling and good filmmaking. We have 8 films at Sundance, and they kind of cross a large spectrum of work and issues. Well, oftentimes social justice issues and the issues that Ford takes on are complicated. And oftentimes when you translate those ideas and those issues into films, they're really about people. They help us recognize that we all have a stake in those issues.
Repent for the forgiveness of your sin.
God Loves Uganda is a film about the exportation of homophobia from the U.S. Christian right to African nations to pass legislation against LGBT people.
The law says no homosexuality in this nation. God doesn't want it. He wants it stopped.
It's an anti-homosexuality bill that would, if passed, bring the death penalty against lesbian and gay people, and so we are really concerned about that.
I know it.
Keep your head up, don't look down. It's almost over.
Gideon's Army takes a look at our criminal justice system, and in particular, at the critical role that public defenders play. The U.S. locks up more people than any other country in the world, both per capita and in terms of raw numbers, and the system is just out of control.
It's about the sanctity of human liberty and the cost of it if you want to take it.
We also just really need to understand what's lost when we rely on the jail and prison system as a way to respond to every problem. We're losing entire communities. We are just throwing away members of our society who could be such amazing contributors.
I think for the first time since he's been at Dalton, this black and white thing has become an issue.
The film follows the story of these two young men who had an amazing opportunity to attend one of the finest private schools in the country, and all of the privileges that brings along with it, and all of the dilemmas it raises for those families.
Everybody in Dalton, they keep asking me. I always say in the middle, but they keep saying, are you rich? Are you poor? Are you rich? Are you poor?
As parents of a black male, know the struggle that they're going to have to face in reality of the way that people look at them and fear them when they see them.
We have this incredible inequality from the richness that you see in the very special opportunity that the young men in the film have to the everyday practice that millions and millions of young men of color experience every day.
Stories can activate people. When people walk out of the theater, how are they moved? What are they ready to do? Well, stories and filmmaking has an unusual capacity to bring people into the issues. Something happens when you have a good story told.
Okay, so a better look at the films you had in Sundance this year, right?
Mm-hmm. But I also want to say something about the God Loves Uganda film. One of the interesting things about that, and it's just something that recently happened, and has something, and it speaks to our range as a foundation. We're a New York-based foundation, but we have offices all over the world. We have 4 offices in Africa. We have 3 offices in South America, 3 in Asia, and they really cover regions in those areas. And for this particular film, the God Loves Uganda film, we've just recently been able to raise funds through those offices to bring that film to Africa, to begin an engaged kind of screenings of that film there, and engage the conversation around these discussions around LGBT rights in Africa and in these countries where, in fact, a lot of gay and lesbian people are in direct danger because of some of the rules that are being and laws that are being passed there. And so in some way, it kind of represents how we think about the many different assets that the foundation has, but not only just in terms of money, but its relationships with other human rights organizations in other parts of the world, but also its relationships with other people, no matter where in other parts of the world, and how we bring these films and allow for the conversation to be more than a conversation in the U.S. where it might premiere, but to allow those films to be in other places. We produced our first independent feature this year, God Loves Uganda, not God Loves Uganda, but Mother of George, which is about the Nigerian refugees in the United States by a filmmaker, Andrew Dasamu. And it's really about Nigeria, and it's about Nigerians who've moved to the U.S. But the interesting thing about it is that we're taking it back to Nigeria and saying, hey, Nollywood, here's one of your filmmakers who's here making this film. Let's think about how we can make more films like that, and then invest in films on that scale in Nigeria through that community of filmmakers.
And on a kind of related note, when we were chatting earlier, you were saying you think that more and more foundations are going to be waking up to the power of filmmaking and where it fits in their work. But where do you think it fits in terms of the overall work that foundations do and what film can do within that, especially documentary?
Well, I think one of the things is that there's a sense that when you're in a foundation and you're supporting work, that you have an agenda in mind. And that agenda is somewhat tied to your own agenda to change people's minds or to change conditions and those kinds of things. And I think that what we thought and we felt very strongly about, and it's one reason why in the first part of this work we wanted to kind of create real strong examples of really good storytelling. That in fact, it's not about, and we really wanted to work with independent filmmakers. We weren't commissioning films. We're not commissioning films at all. We do, because I'm a filmmaker, oftentimes filmmakers will ask me to come in and look at films with them in their edit room and comment from that point of view, from just an experience working with films. But I've never gone in and said, well, you have to make this film a certain way because this is what the Ford Foundation thinks. Because we really do believe that if films are made and they speak to people, then that's our opportunity. So we've really kind of worked to try and help other foundations feel comfortable with the idea that working with independent producers, working with those who know how to do good storytelling, know how to make dramatic stories, are the people we want to work with, because that's when people are moved. And that's what you want. You want people to be moved, and that's where the opportunity is. And the next part of it is really kind of thinking about, okay, how do you prepare yourself to take advantage of that opportunity? And we work with organizations like the Fledgling Fund, Active Voice, and others to kind of help us think through that strategy and to think about how you engage that work, those people, once you have them really considering what they're seeing. And then we think about how we're creating a whole effort to really kind of grab and analyze the kinds of information that surrounds it, the conversation that surrounds these films, to think about, okay, where's the next step for us as a foundation if we see an opening? Where is the opening? Do we know exactly what the first step is to change what might be monumental issues or problems in the world? So in some way, the films begin to inform that and begin to give us openings to those kinds of things. So we see it as a very critical part of how we do our strategic planning around issues in human rights, issues in economic development, issues around LGBT rights. Those kinds of things become ways in which we use these films to help us think about how we spend our other funds to begin to address those larger issues.
Okay, great. So once a filmmaker gets a grant working with you and the film goes into production because it's been fully financed, what is it like to work with Ford? How do you guys get involved? You mentioned being in the edit room, giving some advice and stuff, but what's kind of the journey like?
Well, one thing you said there, being fully funded, because we rarely fully fund a project.
Yeah, no, sorry, I said once it's fully funded.
Well, it is fully funded.
So
well,
the film goes into production.
Oftentimes we'll work on films in many levels. Sometimes we are working in development grants.
Okay.
So the films can begin that process of raising money. Sometimes we come in the middle knowing that that's a critical stage when films really need to find their way to a place where, in fact, they are realized and other people can then see that there's something very exciting and strong in the work that's being done. Sometimes we come in with the very strong ending funds because we realize the time for this film to hit the public is right now, and it needs a large amount of money to kind of get there, and we see something that really is going to move there. So we really like the partnership around the funding because in many ways it allows us to think about what we have in terms of funds and how we can best spend it to make sure a film is on time with the issue it's working with, but at the same time to make films available to others who might be partners with us. But once it's there, you're asking what happens once it's...
Yeah, what happens once it's in production?
Once it's in production, we have multiple relationships, different kinds of relationships with different films. There's some films that we fund and, you know, I will ask for cuts and they will send me cuts at times, but it's not a lot of dialogue around how it's working. Okay. Other times there are filmmakers who say, look, I want you to fund this, but I want you to come in and look at what I have first and tell me where you think we are and to make an assessment of what you think we need in order to get finished. And others will come and want to talk about the project itself and say, you know, I'm in a mess, I'm stuck, it's not working right now. Can you or any of your people who have understanding of the issue kind of come in and just talk with me about that? The other part is sometimes when I'm bringing other program officers in to partner with me, and I think the next piece we'll see is about a piece on criminal justice. I remember Eugene Jarecki saying, I want you to come in and look at my film. You know, it was right after he had done the Reagan film. He wanted me to look at his film on criminal justice, and I went and I watched it and said, this is monumental. What you're really doing is so important to the work we're trying to do. I would like to bring my program officer who's doing the criminal justice work in to watch this at some point. And he said, well, give me a little bit more time. Let me work on it a little bit. I'm glad that you think there's something there. Let me work on it and then bring her in. And when I brought her in, it was clear that she recognized the same thing. And together we were able to make a grant at that point to get him finished. And it was a major grant. We knew this film needed to be finished now. And it was very much a part of a larger strategy around criminal justice. That became the first film. Gideon's Army is the second film. We're now in a third film, realizing that all these things mean we really need to bring a larger conversation to big issues. And it's not going to be solved by one film, but it really sometimes needs different vantage points in order to be able to tackle the problem the way we want to tackle it through the foundation or other foundations want to work with us to do that. And what we do with the films is also convene other foundations around the work and bring them into the work with us. They don't fund necessarily films, but they do work in the areas we work in, say criminal justice, LGBT rights, HIV work, human rights work, things like that.
And so are they bringing other types of in-kind support and in-kind expertise?
Oftentimes it's expertise, it's in-kind support, and oftentimes they're much more comfortable working with the afterlife of the film, the engagement work, supporting that side of the work. I think that for independent filmmakers, that long life of your film is really the dynamic part of it. I mean, it's one thing to get through the hard work of making a film, but when a film has a long life, and I think Mara will talk about it when she talks about Half the Sky, that's a really dynamic part of it. You know, it's the hard work making the film, but your film has so much potential in the public space, but it also needs funds to do that. And oftentimes foundations might not be supporting production work, but there are many of them out there who are interested in supporting the issues that you're dealing with in your film. And we find that if you can bring people in who look at it and help you think about the many different issues, sometimes we have a very clear sense we're doing criminal justice and it's just about that. Well, criminal justice is also about economic development. Because in cities around the US, the integrated industry is no longer the audio industry, it's the prison industry. What does it mean to unravel that? If you start lessening the number of prisoners, prisons close down. What happens to the community that's been living off of that prison for a long time? Food people, laundry people, guards, all these people are now in a town, and that's their central industry, that's the central business within that town. So we look at it that way holistically and realize that all these parts become a part of the whole when we're thinking about solving problems and thinking about what does social change really look like. Maybe we'll look at...
I was going to say, are you ready? Yeah. Do you want to introduce it?
This is Eugene Jarecki's film. It's the film House I Live In, and he's really talking about how this whole issue of prison and the incarceration kind of got out of control in the United States.
Okay, great. If we could have that, please.
Understand the war on drugs has never been about drugs.
America's public enemy number one is drug abuse.
What will you do when someone offers you drugs?
We intend to end the drug menace and to eliminate this dark, evil enemy within.
Put them away where they belong.
3 strikes and you are out.
Somebody down the road said drugs are bad. Okay, there's no argument there. But think about where we are 30 years later.
I do what I have to do. I know how to survive.
Yeah, I got some weed, too.
Don't let them run.
The war against drugs is heating up.
I think they should have wrote prison guard on my forehead when I was born because it just fits me.
I say he's a criminal. Let him go to prison.
I have a life and 30-year sentence.
20 years for drug trafficking.
I have life without parole for 3 ounces of methamphetamine.
Of the 2,600 people I've sent to federal prison, I've seen 3 or 4 kingpins. We're incarcerated poor people who are drug addicts.
You're watching poor, uneducated people be fed into a machine like meat to make sausage.
Law enforcement agencies get rewarded in cash for the sheer numbers of drug arrests.
The money's ours now. That's my money now.
The scale is unbelievable.
Nobody jails their population at the rate that we do.
All sorts of people get a financial interest.
Taser gun manufacturers, healthcare providers, phone companies.
You build a bed, they fill the bed. And you'll get rich, and we'll get rich, and we'll all be rich together.
Engaged in a great experiment. What happens when you take large numbers of people, remove them from their neighborhoods, their families?
What y'all getting them for?
What does this do to the broader community?
The drug war is a Holocaust in slow motion.
This is a war on all Americans. I think people keep saying, well, that's about them. Well, no, it's about you.
So as you can see, when we went into an edit room and we saw the beginning, this film in kind of a rough cut form, we realized that this was the film that could really kind of launch a larger strategy around prison reform. But we realized it wasn't the only thing. It was the introductory piece in a sense. It said, look, there is a problem in the US. It has to do with how we imprison people, how we try and then move them into incarceration, and how do you get out of that? And that's the big question, how do you get out of that? We then moved to another film, and that's when we did Gideon's Army. You say, well, one part of it is those people who defend those who are finding themselves always plea bargaining their cases and not finding a way out of prison, but finding a way into prison. And so we realized that the idea is you keep thinking about the issue and the needs in terms of the different ways in which people need to look at it from different angles. We keep trying to look at the independent community, and where's a film out there that might be addressing that, and addressing it in a way with a very strong concern with the idea of storytelling, characters, and drama. I mean, films work because they're dramatic and they have strong characters. Those at the core, that's what makes them work. And of course, in some way, you have to care about the issue that they're raising, and so we're looking for that kind of work, and that's what we're trying to fund.
And so, in terms of if you're a filmmaker and you think you've got something, what's a good way for a filmmaker to try and understand when they might have a film that fits with something that you guys are ready to talk about?
Well, there are a number of things. I mean, it's really important to take a look at our website in terms of the things that we do and the places that we work in. One of the big growth areas for us, even in this work, are our international offices. For instance, in Egypt, when visiting my Egypt office, I came there with some films that I thought they would be interested in. They really were looking at the aftermath of Tahrir Square and the coming elections, and the representative looked at me and says, a lot of these films are going to get made, and they're important. I believe that they are really important. But she said, the key for us here and what we think in terms of thinking about the future is that Egypt is such a diverse place. How do we begin to start helping everyone recognize that the real challenge for democracy is how we bring all those diverse interests and diverse people around a common sense of government and what it needs to do for us. So we want to start looking in that direction. So I said, wait a minute, I'm backing up. I'm not going to tell me what you're looking for, and maybe it's not me that's going to find these films. Maybe you're going to find them. So what we did then is made grants, made money available to them to fund filmmakers that they knew on the ground were doing the kind of work that they were thinking about. Create a film fund in a place like we did with Sundance, in a place in the air fund in the MENA area, so they could fund filmmakers in that region, and to create a center where in fact those films could be screened, where in fact what we're doing here and what we're talking about, this place where in fact people could screen films and engage and discuss them, would be possible for them. And I think that in some way we work with our offices to try and think about ways in which we're bringing this storytelling to them, but they're telling us how in fact, from their intelligence on the ground, they're there all the time, how in fact it's going to best serve them and best be something that's going to build the film community there that they know exists in their communities. So we work very closely with our international offices, and I think in some way that's our big growth area. And what we find is that we're bringing many more filmmakers, and we'll be bringing many more filmmakers from other parts of the world into the space of international film presentation.
When we first had our first conversation, I think one of the first questions you asked me is how many countries are going to be there?
Yes,
and
exactly.
That's, I guess really looking out to the world for the broadest range of stories at this point.
That's how you convinced me I should be here.
Okay, there you go.
Yes.
Great. So one of the things you talked about is this kind of strategic planning and the conversations and the long life of the film and the conversations around that for the filmmaker. And you reference Half the Sky, who are going to be here tomorrow. But what's your kind of opinion on how those work? I mean, I work in the digital space. A lot of the conversations are going on there. But is that the priority space for you? Do you see other types of conversations that have to happen, traditional press?
Mm-hmm. Well, we try to keep our vision to the future. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we did when we started the fund is that we decided we were going to make a continual grant to the Tribeca Institute. With this in mind, and because Tribeca was starting what they called a new transmedia fund, and it was really a kind of an experimental space to explore what transmedia really was, and how do you take storytelling that might be in a documentary form, but think about the ways in which you might find new audiences by creating new opportunities for that kind of engagement, and it can be many different things. We have one right now that, well, I won't go into the particulars of it, but it's really about how do you recognize that we are receiving content in many different forms, in many different ways, and how do you in some way allow for the not only experimentation in that, but the creation of real products that in many ways speak in that space. And for us, the more people who are moved and affected by the content, the more we have opportunity to be actively involved with them around these larger purposes of a foundation like Ford, to have to promote social change and social justice, not just in the US, but around the world. And so all of these things that we do are not, they're not just for a US audience, but we really are thinking about how all these things we do are part of our large collection of offices and regions that we work in around the world.
So global films, global audience, global conversation, that's
Well,
a priority for you right now.
we feel in some way that even if we're talking about an issue of mass incarceration in the US, it has meaning and value for audiences, not just in the US, but in other parts of the world as well, if we do it right. And if the storytelling's strong, we think it has value there too.
Okay, great. And when I said that I was interviewing you, there was a number of people who asked the same question because it's been recently announced that you're leaving the Ford Foundation. What's going to happen with JustFilms?
Well, JustFilms from the very beginning was a multi-year, long-term commitment. It's not going anywhere.
Okay.
There'll be a new person in running it.
Announced yet? No?
No, not announced yet, but the search is really active right now. It's not, I think it's a position a lot of people are looking at.
I bet.
And you know, the thing about it is that we don't just, and I'm not bragging this about the foundation, but we don't just do the work, but we do walk the talk in a sense. A part of what we do at the foundation is we create a lot of venues where in fact films are shown. And films can be seen, and they're free events, and we partner with lots of people to really advance the work of independent producers. We believe that they do God's work in a sense. You know, they work very hard, they make very little money, but they believe in what they do, and they bring their heart to the work. And we want that available to people, not because we just love independent producers. They can be a pain in the butt, really. You know, but we love what they do, and when they do it for the right reasons, and oftentimes because it's coming from their heart and from their soul, it speaks to other people. And if it's dramatic and the elements are there, we have confidence that we can help them find their audiences.
Okay, great. We have some time for question and answers from the audience. Has anyone got a question they'd like to ask Orlando? Got one right here, please? Well, the microphone's going to come up to you. And if you could introduce yourselves and say where you're from, please.
Hi, my name is Milica Bedoya. I'm executive producer of Indomita, a production company based in Bolivia in South America. So my question is related to that region. It's been interesting because I haven't heard many people talk about if there's any interest in developing themes and stories for Latin America. So I wanted to ask, what's the Ford Foundation take on that?
Yes, we have an office in Mexico, in Chile, and in Brazil. And do you know the organization Ambulante? We work with them very actively. My Mexico office does an enormous amount of work, a lot of film production work there. Bolivia is in that region just between our Chile office and our Mexico office, so you kind of fit in two offices right now. And we have quite a few products that films that are in production right now in that region. And Brazil is another place where we're producing a lot of work out of Brazil, in Peru. So that's a real active space for us right now. And we have program officers who are really committed to it. Our reps are committed to it. We're doing a major piece on community cash transfer work there and indigenous women in Peru and Colombia in that space. We have another film in the Peruvian rainforest on an indigenous leader who has been imprisoned and is being charged for murder, and his trial is up right now, and it's been in production for the last 3 years. We have multiple films in Brazil right now. So it's an active area for us in one. So you should really kind of look at our Chile office and our Mexico office and be in touch with them. And again, all their information is on our website. I mean, we post all that, so we want you to be in touch with them.
Great, thank you.
We've got a question at the back. Can you wait for the microphone, please? Because not everyone will get to hear you. Sorry about that.
I'm Tyler Meeson. I'm from the United States. As a filmmaker who, much like other filmmakers in this room, have undoubtedly applied to numerous grants and have been turned down, we often hear about what grants do apply, what they do fund. However, it would be very nice to hear a frank answer of what they don't and what exactly can get a film a flat no. What can we do as filmmakers to really improve our grant selection, our grant application, and do the grants, which are often very lengthy, 10 to 12 pages, treatments, 2 or 3 pages, Do they even get read?
Well,
I mean, are they worth diddling over every word?
Let me answer your question.
Yeah,
Number one, we don't ask you to do 12 pages. We do not do that. I would not read a 12-page proposal to me. But we ask you, and we have very clear forms that we send out. If you're applying for, we send, and on our website we tell you very clear forms that allow you to fund, and they're 3 pages, and they give you the questions and everything that you have to do to fill them out. So that's one part of it. The other is that I think that for foundations in general, and there are a lot of foundations that support media work and films, that it's important to look at what they do. I mean, because they have a media fund, they don't necessarily fund everything. Like, we're a social justice foundation, we don't fund health. I get so many proposals that come in that ask me to do things around health. We don't do it. So it's not something that I can fund. So I mean, so it's really important to, and foundations are pretty transparent about what they do. So if you really you investigate what they do, you'll get a good sense of what's possible there. I think also the inquiry is so important in terms of how you are positioning your piece to speak to those issues. I mean, we have a broad set of initiatives that we work in, but if it's outside of that, it's not going to, it has a hard time getting funded. We would ask you to then apply to Sundance or to one of the re-granting spaces. But, so I think that's an important thing to do, to really do the homework and investigate who you're talking to and how you are fashioning your ask to them. But I wouldn't write a 10-page proposal to kind of talk to them. I write a letter. Because I receive about 1,000 inquiries a year. A letter is much better than a 10-page, request when you think about 1,000 people asking for funds.
But they often ask for that.
I would say that I'm giving you my best recommendation.
Yeah,
okay.
We're talking about how Ford works, I think.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
and that's good advice. I think we had another question over here. Can we get a microphone just over, please?
Hi, Orlando. It's Simon Nash from Australia. I guess it's the next person's problem, not yours. I would say my experience with Ford has been it's very hard to get a final decision from, there's a long time process. So particularly if you're not in New York or you're not we don't know each other person to person. Getting the no seems to take.
Can you give me an example? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, I'm doing a film with Jonathan Stack, who you know.
Mm-hmm.
A particular project. It's just we've never got a no from Ford on it. We've got a lot of maybes, but never quite got the no, and that seems to be a long process. And it's not a criticism as such. Yeah. It's just often with foundations, I found that you know what filmmakers like. They need a fast no is the second best answer, because it means okay, we have to go to another place and go to another door or try again. But I find perhaps it's a bit unfair on Ford, but as the foundations become much more an integral part of these types of projects, that process is a problem, isn't it?
Well, let me say it two ways. And I understand. I come from that world, and you want to get a definite answer sometimes. But I think that a no is not a non-answer is not a no, though. And it might be that they're considering it, but they're considering it with other pieces of work that they're looking at. I know how I'm looking at it. That sometimes I'm considering it, but whether it's at the moment that I can do it, it might not be the case. But maybe the best thing is say keep. The response should be keep asking, and that might be the best way to do it. Sometimes you think that's
annoying if you
that's
keep
a little
doing
teasing,
that.
But I think when we're not saying no, it means we're not cutting you off.
Okay,
Nick.
One last question. Can we get Nick a microphone, please?
I just wanted to take this, it's Nick Fraser of the BBC, to take this opportunity to say how much I really think Orlando did an absolutely spectacular and wonderful job at the Ford Foundation. We are so grateful to Orlando, and no one will quite know the sacrifices he had to make and also the courage it took to do what he did. But I have a question for you, which is slightly more general, and that is, it seems to me on the whole that the tentacular influence of the American right on culture as well as politics has been underreported in the past 10 years. And I wonder whether you feel that places like Ford can do an adequate job of covering this, or how in the future maybe it could be done a bit more comprehensively.
No, I think it's a very good question. I think that it's something that is a part of our conversation within the foundation. I think that, as you know, that right can be incredibly vicious, and I think that, and it's sad that we exist in a moment when in fact people begin to cower because they don't want to take on the viciousness of the attack once you're in the crosshairs. And I think that, and I'm talking broadly in terms of foundations, not just about Ford. I think in some way we are not as clear about that as we should be, and direct about taking that on. I think that I know that we have a film that we are part of with you, and you feel that, you've been feeling that pressure. I think that we had a film at Sundance, and it totally called out, even in name, you know, some of the identity or the image of what it was trying to take on around elections in this country. And I think that there is a sense that there is no ground where in fact we have mutual interests, whether it's on the extreme right or the extreme left. I think that foundations kind of sit in a place where in fact they have to be much more open about their own positions on things and be willing to fight for them, you know? And, but at the same time realize that we're not really right or left. We're really about justice. And we're really about certain kinds of real issues that we stand for, and make that very clear, but be in the conversation around those moments when in fact there is being pressure exerted on independent, on free expression that we think is problematic, because we stand for that as well. That's a very important quality for the Ford Foundation, but we're not necessarily raising our voice, I think, all the time in defense of it. And I think we have to engage. I think someone has to find a way where, in fact, those kind of conversations are engaged. I think what's in jeopardy right now is this idea of free expression, and the fact that if you are coming at it with a sound journalistic kind of approach to the work, and you can defend the work that you do, then that's a legitimate conversation. But you should never feel like you're being forced to back away from what you believe you're doing and the work that you're doing, because you're afraid of the pressure that might come from another place. And they can come from the left and from the right. But foundations should be a space where, in fact, that kind of conversation can be convened. And that's a personal opinion. But I think that in some way we're wrestling with that. And we wrestle with it in our officers meeting that we have every other week of the month, in terms of the work we do and how it sits in the public space and therefore has to be a part of the public conversation.
Okay. Thank you for that thoughtful answer. Thank you for your time and for being with us. I hope everyone enjoyed the session, and I hope you will join us for the networking drinks at the Martinez Beach across the street in about 15-20 minutes. Thanks.